Okay, folks, scholars. One of the things that this class is about is not just world history. It teaches a wisdom lesson. And that wisdom lesson is that you and I don't create ourselves. And in fact, you and I are very much the product, our discussions, our ways of thinking, everything, product of not just our parents, but of thousands of years of history and going back to certain specific regions like the Fertile Crescent, okay? Eastern Mediterranean. The other thing, too, to remember about this is that not only do we not create ourselves, is that we like to think of ourselves today as modern. Man, we are like even postmodern. Man, we are so hip. And we're going to figure out things. And certainly with science, man, yeah, we'll get a coronavirus antidote or something. We'll fix things. We can go to the moon. We can go to Mars. We can do all sorts of stuff, you know, and we're just so much smarter than everyone in the past. Not true at all. This class is supposed to teach us, certainly there are greater amounts of knowledge and technical information available today, but fundamentally, when it comes down to especially the most important things in our lives, which would be religion, politics, family, things like that, we live ancient. We are ancient peoples living ancient lives. And for discussions of democracy and like a word being used a lot in the elections now is populace. What is populism? Popular sovereignty. We're going to look at that. Aristotle's going to talk about popular sovereignty, and you read about popular sovereignty today in the sort of roots of it, and like ideas about how we expect term limits. We're in an election year, and we expect people to then, okay, if you don't win, you step down. If you do win, you get another term limit. You know, and where does this come from? Well, we didn't make it up, and it wasn't made up by our founding fathers in the United States. It was made. The ideas go way back in history. And they are the ideas of good government. And so what we're going to look at today is this two people, Lycurgus and of Sparta, and Solon of Greece, of Athens. And between the two of them, there's a dynamism of ideas which have gone back and forth throughout history and still play at different levels, you know, in our own world today. The reason you guys are probably signed up to come to Point Loma was the hope to be in dormitories. Well, Lycurgus develops a society in which dormitories are help make life better for especially education and better for the good. That's Lycurgus. And the beginnings of American education, where the emphasis on dormitories and stuff like that, go to Lycurgus. Lycurgus gives us this, and Plato, and a type of utopian model of a community. But what do you downplay in that? Well, if you read Lycurgus, you read what you were assigned from Plutarch today on Lycurgus. Lycurgus didn't think families were important. Marriage diminished, eugenics, kill kids, stuff like that. Only best and brightest get to survive, and you put best and brightest in dormitories. And so the roots of this dormitory idea, maybe we're a better world by not living in dormitories, not putting you guys into dormitories. But dormitories throughout history, when you go to see Hogwarts, if you watch that Hogwarts, man, that is Lycurgus. That is not Solon. And the idea of having the Quidditch and those games and stuff, man, you saw here health and physical strength and the ability to actually do violent actions in a controlled setting of like of sports that's Sparta, it's Sparta. And so look, throughout your lives, this reading here, it should help you make decisions and to think about things and to be wise about things. To the extent like especially the relationship between family and separation from family into like dormitories and diminishment of family. That's a big issue here today. Although individualism also is a big issue. Lycurgus believes in a sort of corporate way of thinking, and Solon does want to encourage the individualism. So individual freedom versus the goodness of society. There's back and forth. There's all sorts of issues that are, man, you can meditate. And one of the joys of my job is that I do get to meditate on this stuff throughout my whole career. And so I go through life and I see Lycurgus versus Solon. I see Sparta and Athens being played out in our society all the time. And what are the values? It's not that one's right and the other's wrong. It's that they work in sort of opposing directions. Both of them pursuing a good, individual freedom good on one side and corporate good on the other side. One being very harsh, Sparta. One being much more sort of like airy-fairy, and if you want to use a technical term. And so you get, baseball team named the Solons. I can't imagine a football team named the Solons. Spartan football. What's that, San Jose State or something like that? See, Spartans are football. Baseball, you can be like a baseball team and be the Solons. This is the Pacific Coast League here. And of course, it's Sacramento. Sacramento wanted to build itself as a, political name, and so you pick the Solons. Let's talk about these guys. This is that House of Representatives where we have a number of, here again, one of the things about our class is go visit Washington, D.C., you go to any courthouse in America, and you'll see quotes on the wall and paintings and statues, and these are all to inform us as to the traditions about who we are. And most likely, they'll go back to things that we'll discuss in our course, and people will discuss in our course. There's also popular culture and movies, These are very bad recent movies. They're no good. But this is Themistocles at Sparta. We didn't read about him today, but Themistocles we'll read about in Herodotus. This is Artemisia. We'll read about her in Herodotus. She's one of my heroes, not in the way she's portrayed in the movie, but in the way Herodotus presents Artemisia, an admiral queen, who's working for the Persians. And then this is Xerxes, which is just foolishness. But this is, what's that guy's name? Leonidas of Sparta. And so the Spartan, Athens up here, and then Sparta here. This dynamism, gets into movies. It gets all sorts of places. This is the older version, which is a very good movie coming out of Herodotus. And we'll get to Herodotus soon. But this dynamism between Athens and Sparta, two experimental societies. At the time, there were other Thebes and, other cities that were doing other interesting things. But down through history, people have written about Athens and Sparta in this way. One of the persons who really starts this traditions of comparing Athens and Sparta is your readings today, which are written by a guy named Plutarch. Plutarch lived same time as like Paul and Luke in our New Testament. And just as Luke is a writer, very interested in, government bureaucracies, elders and bishops and apostles and deacons and elections, of apostles and deacons. Plutarch was also interested in all this sort of stuff. And then you put them into biographies, Plutarch especially loved the biographical form of the lives of the noble Greeks and Romans. And then, of course, Luke writes a biography, a little short biography of Jesus. And so Roman literature had this love of what's called the bios, the little short biography, a biographical sketch, which has a lot of implications about the importance of a person on a bigger sphere of political activity, world activity. So our Gospels are these similar things to what you read about Lycurgus and Solon, and then Theseus before this. So let's get into this here just real quick. Athens is here in Attica. Sparta's here in what is called Laconia, okay, or Lacedaemon. So in most of your Bibles, it will talk about Paul going to Lacedaemonia. Well, Paul's going to Sparta. Okay, so he goes to Athens and Sparta. And then if you want to go see the Parthenon, which is the great building of the Athens, don't go to Greece. Go to Nashville, Tennessee, because that's Nashville, Tennessee. We love this stuff. This is what the Parthenon's been being rebuilt, so it's getting better than this. I took this off the internet a while back. And this idea of the Acropolis we talked about. And then this is Athens here and Sparta here. They're basically the distance, say, from Oceanside to Ventura. And imagine Oceanside and Ventura at war with each other. Well, that's the Peloponnesian War in ancient history. And so it's little battle in some ways, but at another level, it's the symbolism. It's what we see laid out that is going to play out through history into the world. This is Solon. The Greeks did not have this is a Roman thing, and the S becomes the C. But let's go to look at Solon here. So we have the Solon there, and just to point out the most important sort of things to hear, is I hope you read with an eye to. You should read the whole everything I assigned, but there's key elements in them, and I'm going to help you see those key elements. And you'll only be tested on the key elements. I'll help you with the test. Don't worry about that. But I'm hoping you read for the breadth and sort of feel it. You're being your own archaeologist here, digging into the sources. This is where we know. So Athens has these factions, okay, and so there's the rich and the poor, and they can't get together. And the rich, Solon is of the rich, so the rich will accept him. And Solon is trusted by the poor. And so Solon becomes this leader. He is asked to lead. The rich consented because Solon was wealthy. Poor consented because he was honest. And so we see that dynamism of the slavery and freedom, rich and poor, that's going to be a big issue here. And then, of course, the first thing that Solon does is, his first reform is to do what we've already discussed about, is that most people fell into slavery by having themselves go bankrupt, and then they had to sell themselves or their family into slavery. And so Solon's first reform was forbidding the mortgages on bodies, forgetting no longer could you legally enslave him or something. A person cannot sell themselves into slavery. And so therefore there's going to be some bankruptcy laws, some different stuff that's got to go along with this to make this work. But Solon is a person who is going to be, right from the start, anti-slavery. First reform is a slave law to end slavery being caused by falling into debt. So freedom is a major issue for Solon, and you go through and there's all sorts of things that we'll talk about here, but I'd like to point out this one, very important. It's sort of cryptic, but this is the way Jesus is. This is the way people think and write. It's a little bit of a parable type of stuff. Okay? When Solon was asked once which city he thought was well governed, he said, that city where those who have not been injured take up the cause of the one who has, and prosecute the case as earnestly as if the wrong had been done to themselves. Accordingly, he allowed anyone to take up the cause of a poor man who had been injured. This is, as it plays out in history, one of the greatest, most famous statements of what a good government is. The last time I heard it was when President Obama was speaking, and he would refer to it, I think, often. But, what is a good government? What's the definition? What's the mark of a good government? Mark of a good government, It's where the poor are taken care of. The weak are taken care of. The rich take care of the poor. The strong take care of the weak. This is the mark of good government. This is why Solon's statue, his bas-relief, is in the House of Representatives. It's because he is this wise man. Both Lycurgus and Solon are these wise men of the ancient world. And he sees that government has to be founded on goodness. And that goodness is ultimately taking care of, especially individuals, the weak. And it has to be set against slavery. The promotion of health for everyone, the promotion of freedom for everyone. This becomes what Athens means. This is why you have Athens, Georgia. This is why you have the Parthenon in Nashville. This is what all these American values get. They're there in Athens. They're there in Solon. And Solon is a great figure in history for that. You don't have to know all of these ins and outs of what he did, but I want to point out some things here. But this is the root of this phrase, the answer to the question of what's a good government. The answer to the question of what's a good government is not that we be rich, not that we be strong. Aristotle's going to make this point very, very clearly in his Politics. Is the answer to what is a good government is one that takes care of its people and his people flourish. The majority of the people flourish. Everyone is looked after. So, let's go. Let me just point out something else too here. Is in all this situation, you notice you get some separations of power. We're going to talk a lot more about these separations of power. We saw them already in the Mosaic laws, in the Mosaic Republic, and we're going to talk some more about them and how they sort of, everything. All these documents are still out there, and so these documents are going to continue to live and combine and do things. But these stories of Solon are very important. So, what you see here that we don't see in anything like this in the Bible is annual presidents. Solon becomes an archon, and that's a one-year term. It means you have lots of power, but for 1 year. You see, and so term limits. We see here in this one-year presidency. We don't know where they come from. I don't want to pretend that this is the first time that term limits appear in the ancient world, but it's one of those earliest times that we actually see the discussion of. Plutarch is relatively late, but the story of Solon is that he was this archon, which is the indicator of a term-limited office. He is not a king for life. He is a term-limited officer. And as you see in the rest of the reading, is after he finishes his term, he has to leave. He goes to traveling and comes back and he ends his life writing bitter poems. That's fun, and be powerful, come back and write bitter poems. The other thing, too, in this is nothing can be voted on until it had been vetted by the 400. This is that type. It's not a veto, but it's you can't get something through until it gets a wide sort of consensus. So this is what we see very strong in Solon, and Solon is this fascinating guy. Let me go back to this. This is Solon's, say 600, and this is like 400, 404, something like that. This is a guy named Pericles. Pericles, Athens becomes wealthy and gets real cocky, and most of the big temples and everything you see in Greece all come from this Periclean period in which Athens is actually an empire, and it's oppressing people and all this. You don't build buildings like this off of olive trees, you have to oppress a bunch of people to build big buildings like this. And so they had become big and powerful, and so they go to war with Sparta. And so there's this war between Sparta and Athens. And so Athens defines itself, and one of the jobs of a speaker is to speak why we are fighting. And he has a famous speech. It's true that we're called a democracy. Athens is a democracy. Sparta is not. As we'll see, Sparta is against democracy. And then he says, while we are thus unconstrained in our private business, we're free to do all sorts of things, but we have a particular regard for those laws which are ordained for the protection of the injured. So this is these Solonic values that are coming and remaining in Athens. Democracy, freedom, individualism, the protection of the weak, and this is why Athens presents itself as good to the world, and it presents itself in this situation as why they deserve to beat Sparta. Okay, so here's Spartans. Arr, 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 Spartans are known for, this, this is Sparta, just being mean. They are, at the basic face of it, one of the nastiest societies in all the world. Remember, Sparta has massive slavery. The helots that we see at the end of this reading, most of the Peloponnese, most of the Laconia is under the oppression of these Spartan leaders, and so do not interpret Sparta as supporting or encouraging freedom. Okay, it's an elitist sort of military clique at the top that is designed to self-perpetuate itself in strength. Okay, and so Lycurgus is, though, he's one of the wise men, and comes up with this other sort of way. Now, Lycurgus, as well, we see, especially when we go through the class, Lycurgus comes to power because he did not want power. He was offered a sneaky way to grab power through killing a kid. But we'll see this when we get to Confucianism, the Duke of Zhou, the great story. What's the, who's the most dangerous man in any sort of kingdom? Well, it's the king's brother. It's the Scar figure in Lion King, right? That's the one. Kill the kid and I gain power. And so Lycurgus doesn't do that. And that becomes a mark of character, and a mark where then they trust him. We can give a person like that power because he has already shown that he doesn't demand power. So Lycurgus travels. He looks at other governments. He thinks about them, the Egyptians, the Cretans. And then, most importantly for us, is here these first reforms is that he creates a Senate, which is to diminish the power of monarchy, balance it with a Senate. And so you create a very powerful Senate. This is what's going to happen with the Roman Empire. The Roman Republic will call Sparta, Lycurgus, its model because of it's built around a very powerful Senate. Okay? And so you have this discussion of the stability of a Senate, basically the landed, powerful elite, okay? But notice here you also get, the Senate reserves the right to dissolve the assembly. There's there's notions of veto and of power in which, so it's now clearly worked out, but we're going to see this more with Rome, and it eventually is going to be one of the stories of the working out into the modern world is how we handle veto along with term limits. Veto and term limits are these sort of two massively important ideas coming out of the ancient world, and this is what's got to be looked after. So Senate's all powerful. That's sort of this key, but they do separate powers, and we'll see how that develops with the Roman Republic. But, there we go into this idea of getting rid of money, getting rid of, it's a radical notion of equality, communal meals where everybody eats the same. So equality, in a lot of utopian societies throughout history, they have followed this Spartan model of the pursuit of equality. Okay? Freedom is very different than equality. Freedom is something Athens is much more involved with. But the rich take care of the poor. They're not arguing for equality. There's a type of imposed equality. If we can create a social situation which will socially create equality, that's what Sparta is really about. And so you have these communal meals and the public mess halls and these stories about then education, and that's where I talked about dormitories. Dormitories are to help create equality. Get everyone here, and everyone's sort of equal in the dormitory, in the cafeteria, and that creates a type of situation for equality. Marriage, however, undermines equality. Marriage is built around a household of values and stuff. And there's even the quote in here. I don't remember where it exactly is, but it's the quote of, if you believe in democracy, Lycurgus dares you to do that in your family. You see, families are not democratic. Families are not egalitarian. Families are hierarchical. Families work, and we're going to see this with Aristotle's politics. How household structures and state structures, he wants to separate them because you shouldn't try and confuse them. And so we'll get there, but these are the big ideas. So marriage, you see, doesn't necessarily support a good society for Lycurgus. And Aristotle built the foundations on marriage. So marriage is limited, it's pushed back, and it's actually turned into a sort of situation in which the children are then taken away from parents. And then worst of worst is, of course, eugenics. Oh, there's the democracy line about Lycurgus, bring it to do in your own family. But this is where, the city was an armed camp. Helots are these slave labor. So it is not an egalitarian society. It's only egalitarian among these individual leaders. And then they, of course, kill babies, which is, these, here down here is you want children in Sparta to be produced by the best men, so you actually breed. Marriages are undermined, so you actually, the best women, most healthy women, most best men, should breed children, and when those children are not physically fit at birth, then you kill them. And that's eugenics, this idea of creating your society. We have had a number of, and we still do have a number of eugenics types of principles in society which go back to these sort of Spartan values. And here again, that's one of these things which goes back and forth, leave it at that, and I look for these things. You've read two short little pieces here that I hope will sort of be with you your whole life, especially as you listen to political discussions, as you listen to political debate, as you think about what's best for society, and especially the relationship of family to state, and then your values of like egalitarianism versus freedom, and then notions of especially how to keep a society free and how to keep a society good. Okay,